Hi, this is Arun from arunsyoga.in. I'm a software engineer who mostly work with Node.js, PHP, and other backend technologies. And I'm an open source contributor as well. I'm a tantric by birth in a family which is passing tantric wisdom from generations to generations from past 2000 years of legacy, and got lucky to travel across India and got chances to study under various gurus from different backgrounds and disciplines. You could connect with me in arunsyoga.in. Here I'm helping you to design a divine lifestyle which is based on Vedic astrology, tantra, and other yogic system of understanding. Hi all, here is the video of our monthly meditation gathering. This workshop, titled as Consciousness Transformed, COVID, Global Uncertainty and Kundalini Yoga. This recording is given to whoever was not able to attend, and if you wish to join our next workshop, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or register on arunsyoga.in so that you will be get alerted when we are having our next workshop. However, welcome to our June workshop, Consciousness Transform, COVID, Global Uncertainty and Kundalini Yoga.
Okay.
You
Hello,
all.
everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome as well to those of us who aren't able to be with us at this particular time because of the time difference, but will be joining us afterwards. You're all held in consciousness. Before I start, I'd like to go over a few practical things. I take it you can all hear me and see me okay? Can you hear me okay? Well, I take it you can. If there's a lot of background noise where you are, then we ask you to mute your phones just out of consideration to everyone else who's listening. But obviously you can unmute your phone or device that you're listening on. If you'd like to ask any comments or raise any questions. And whilst I'm talking, I certainly invite you to comment, share any thoughts or ask any questions, because I don't want what I share with you just to be words. I want it to have meaning for you. So we'll start with my session. And I'm going to be talking a little bit on the subject of Consciousness Transformed, which is a book by Joel Goldsmith. And then we'll have Aaron's session and he'll elaborate on that theme. Before I do, I'll just introduce myself and then we'll have a brief meditation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Heather. I'm the founder of Mystical Meditation, and I host and organize spiritual talks and events in London and California. The work that I do is based mainly on the teachings of Joel Goldsmith, who was a 20th century American mystic, and I've been studying his teachings for very many years now. Okay, well, that's a little bit about me. Let's start with a meditation, just a very brief meditation. Those of you who are present with me now are familiar with meditation, so I won't talk about ways in which we can meditate, but I suggest that we just be still for a moment or two in any way that has meaning for you. And if you'd like to close your eyes, you're welcome to. So let's just be still together for a moment now. Thank you. If you closed your eyes, I invite you to open them now. So as I've said, we've chosen for the topic for our workshop today, the subject of consciousness transformed, which is the title of one of Joel Goldsmith's books, which is actually a collection of talks that he gave in Hawaii from 1963 to 1964. And we'll look at this book specifically focusing on the subjects of disease and global economy from a spiritual perspective, in view of what we've been experiencing over the past year and a half now in the world. And Joel tells us that the root of both of these problems, so disease and economic downturn, is what he describes as fear, a belief in two powers. And he calls this over and over again in all of his books, a belief in God and a belief that there's something other than consciousness, spirit, life. Joel uses these words interchangeably. So we'll look at why our fears are based on this false premise, a belief in two powers, and how we can refocus our thinking and our spiritual perspective and our spiritual seeing, our spiritual insight on both of these subjects, so that we can experience the harmony that is our divine birthright. So in this book, Consciousness Transformed, Joel tells us that the word consciousness is the most important word in the whole of the Infinite Way vocabulary. Consciousness, he explains, in its pure state, constitutes the entirety of our human experience, our consciousness, or ever experience, our own consciousness. But we are darkly, quoting from the Bible, we see through a glass darkly. And what I mean by that is that we're mesmerized by the thoughts that are presented to us, the thought patterns, the conditioned thought patterns. So, for example, beliefs are passed down to us from generation after generation. And one example of this is, an important example of this is that we believe that we were born and that we will therefore die. But of course, consciousness, life itself doesn't die. Consciousness, life lives. And Joel exemplifies this point in Consciousness Transformed by quoting from Emerson. And he says that as we begin to grasp a metaphysical understanding of consciousness, we realize that the only mind that exists is our own mind. The only intelligence that there is our own spiritual intelligence. The only power that there is the power of our own consciousness. And that we are, as Emerson describes it, inlets and outlets of that one mind. And when we grasp this rudimentary principle that's so important in the teachings of the Infinite Way, we realize that there can only be one power, that our consciousness is the only power, and this that eliminates fear in our experience, which, as we've said, is the root of all our problems. But let's break this down a little bit further so that we can examine this truth more deeply. I want to read to you a quote from Consciousness Transformed. It's on page 11, so I'll read it to you now. And in it, Joel says, "Every one of us from childhood has been told to fear the external, whether in the form of germs, infection, contagion, weather, we have been told to fear external powers. Now, supposing you were to catch a glimpse of the metaphysical principle, and he's going to quote now from the Bible, the metaphysical principle contained in Pilate, thou couldst have no power over me. So what does Joel mean by this? What is this metaphysical principle? And he goes on to explain that when we realize that there's only one consciousness, one mind, one intelligence, as we've been discussing in our previous workshops, then we realize that we have complete dominion over the thought patterns that are being presented to us. We don't have to believe them, and therefore we can change our reaction to them. And that is our God-given dominion. So fear is rooted, Joel tells us, in the belief in the possibility of death, the fear of death. And when we're able to overcome that fear of death through understanding the truth of who and what we actually are, then we're able to demonstrate eternal life, eternal. Now, saying that doesn't mean to say that we don't exit, we don't transition from this parenthesis of life that we've come into. But it does mean that we don't die. That, in actual fact, is an impossibility. Consciousness can't die. Life lives. We are immortality. That's what we are. But we no longer give false power to the external, which it simply doesn't have, because there is nothing external to our own consciousness. There is nothing. We are the substance of everything that we experience in every moment. Our consciousness is the substance of that. So, as Joel puts it, the only power that is being. The only power that is being. And taking that a step further, we then realize that nothing is actually imbued with the power of evil. So where we've been fearing a disease, for example, or a lack, as in the lack of finances, lack of well-being, we realize that there is no power in anything external to us, because, as we've just said, there is nothing external to us. And really, this is so fundamental in Joel's teaching. The crucial difference is that life appears to react to it appears to respond to our reaction to it. And therefore, if we want to change our human experience, we need to change our reaction to it. And this makes me think of Shakespeare, quote from Shakespeare, which Joel does quote in another one of his books. And that is, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. I'll share with you a quote that I love from Neil Donald Walsh, the Western spiritual teacher. He's most well known for his book, Conversations with God. But in this quote, he explains what I've just shared in this way. I'll read it to you slowly because it's such a poignant statement. He says, quantum physics tells us that nothing that is observed is unaffected by the observer. That statement from science, this is still his quote, holds an enormous and powerful insight. It means that everyone sees a different truth because everyone is creating what they see. So when I read that, I think of, again, quoting from the Bible, in my Father's house, there are many mansions, i.e. there's just one consciousness, but we all have different perceptions within that one consciousness. And Joel elaborates on this in this way. he says, again, I'll quote for you from Consciousness Transformed. You realize that there is only one. You're never using one power over another. And bear in mind, we're thinking about this in relation to what to do if we're faced with the appearance of a disease, as in COVID, or what to do if we're faced with the appearance of a lack of income, a lack of financial well-being. So you're never using one power over another, nor are you protecting yourself from a power. Your protection is the realization of yourself as the only power. There is no such thing as God protecting us. The I of us is the power, and there's nothing to be protected from. Now, isn't that so radically different from the way that we've often been conditioned to perceive our experience? So before all of this becomes too theoretical and too much quote-based, I want us to consider how we can put this spiritual truth into practice in our own experience. So if, as we've seen globally over the past year, we're faced with the appearance of a life-threatening disease or an economic downturn has been rife in the wake of the pandemic, how can we know the truth and see it for ourselves as our experience? Well, before I explain, let me just give you one more quote from Consciousness Transformed, in which Joel says, "There is no God protecting us because there's nothing to be protected from. If you want to be free, you have to leave this world and get into God's kingdom. Only in proportion as you can recognize the impersonal, universal nature of error, and then realize it as a non-power, only then are you protected, and only then can you do the healing work. There is no God and," remember we're going back to there is no God and a disease. There is only God, i.e. consciousness. And everything that happens to us as sin, disease, lack, or limitation represents an appearance, and the recognition destroys the appearance. So that's the end of the quote. Now, there's two facets here that I'd like to pick up on. The first is what Joel means by God's kingdom. Do you remember he mentioned God's kingdom? Now, I take God's kingdom to mean our consciousness, spirit, life, that invisible part of ourselves that appears to be back of us, but in actual fact constitutes our whole experience. And when I'm resting back in the conscious awareness of that invisible part of myself, when I'm, Joel often calls it communing, I like to think of it as being, when I'm just being that invisible part of myself, resting in it, I am consciously in God's kingdom and therefore experiencing the harmony of this. The second thing I'd like to mention here is Joel's description of the human world as an appearance. Now, when we know that all sensory experience, if you remember, we talked about this a little bit in our last workshop, all sensory experience is in substance, thoughts. Everything we perceive is a mental image. Just like in dreams, it has no absolute reality. And when we're looking out through spiritual eyes, so when we're resting in that invisible part of ourselves, looking out through and as the light of consciousness, then we see that the human experience is ephemeral. It becomes a very concrete experience for us. And it's resting consistently in this seeing that produces harmony in our experience. And there's a super quote from Lao Tzu that I love that really captures the whole practice of the infinite way. And Lao Tzu says, remain in the center watching, and then forget you are there. Remain in the center watching, and then forget you are there. And that, in a nutshell, for me, captures the whole teaching of the infinite way, because we're encouraged to remain in the center of our being, looking out, watching, allowing consciousness, the consciousness that we are, to flow out through us, not reacting to the mental images that our mind is presenting to us. And therein lies our peace. Does anyone have any comments or questions that they'd like to share at this point? Any thoughts? I think it's something that often needs to be dwelt on and contemplated deeply. And the more one does so, the deeper the practice becomes. Okay, well, if there's no questions, then let's end this very short session today with another brief meditation, and then I'll hand over to Aaron. This time, when we close our eyes just for a moment in meditation, you're welcome to join me in focusing on your heart center and feeling the light radiate out through there, or through your third eye if you prefer. Okay, if you'd like to close your eyes, you're welcome to, but you don't have to. So let's be still together for a moment then. Thank you. That was beautiful. If you closed your eyes, I invite you to open them now. Okay, Aaron, I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
So, especially now, the situations are going very worse. Like there are a lot of problems arising across globe, and human beings are actually dying because of the COVID situation. And why this is happening? We look at into the core deep of the cause or the reasons for these kind of problems which are occurring. The deep down, we know that we are the one. I mean, as the Upanishad says, we are like, we are an, we don't have a beginning, we don't have an end, and we ourself is the God. It's not like God is another entity, and that is nothing but consciousness. So when we come into that thing, or when we are able to touch that particular presence, what happens is like we get into a very big peaceful state of mind, and from there all the frights and doubts and things that like that will disappear, because we will be only scared if we are scared of the something. We can only get scared if we are actually scared of something. Like if we think there is the other, then we can actually get scared of us. I mean the events. But if there is no two, we can't be get scared, and that is the realization which we come into. So to come into this realization, we've been using many kinds of different kinds of meditation techniques and stuffs like that. And especially the Kundalini meditation is one of the best meditation which we can actually uh, goes into that thing. And this is a very first level of meditation which I have shared actually, like basically to understand the different chakras of the body and things like that. And that is the level one. And basically from there, if we are understanding the chakras and other things in our body, from there we can actually try and get into different the next level of the meditation, like to come into the center or to understand the absolute. I'm not different from the real, or I'm not different from the what it is, that as it is. Like I'm not a secondary entity from the existence. To come into that understanding, we actually need a lot of um, interception. Like we have to think and take out a lot of conditioning that is actually happening in our mind. So to come into and to go into that deep thing, we have to go through different kind of processes, because being conditioned um, because we have been conditioned from generations, and we are getting conditioned every day from society and surroundings and stuffs like that. So we could actually begin this meditation. So I am. The meditation technique is being given on the description below. You could watch it as a guided meditation.